Welcome to Agility. I'm your host, John Coleman. Russ Lewis, welcome to the Agility podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks, John. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to be here in person. I've listened to your podcasts and imagine it, remote. And here we are actually together in the same room in person. This is so great.
Yeah, it's the first one actually, first in person. So hopefully the first of many. We have the gears and we hope we can make it happen.
Great.
So Russ, the reason we're talking today is because you're about to publish a new book actually on the 9th of May. By the time people will have heard the podcast, it will have been out already. It's called An Operating Model for Business Agility. And it's part of a series. It's a booklet. I've actually seen it in person and it's a nice little light book. Really, really cool as well. I guess what I'd like to find out first for the viewers and for the listeners is, who is Russ Lewis and what brought you to this place where maybe you thought about writing a book like this?
Yeah, thanks. So I've been around a long time. I started as an engineer. Actually, I did an apprenticeship as an engineer and I learned how to file blocks of aluminium and fit them to airplanes and engines at Rolls-Royce. And when I left there, I got into computers and software and a little book on how to program computers. Loved it, absolutely made sense to me. And I built systems just self-taught. In fact, everything I do is self-taught. And eventually I taught other people how to build systems. If you travel in London and you pay if you pay using your Oyster card outside of central London, or if you just use your contactless card, then you'll be using one of the systems that I designed and built. And I led the team that did it. What was more significant about building the very first software systems for London Transport, for that part, the fares and ticketing, is they'd never built software. They never operated software before. They were an organization that relied on other companies to operate their tech. And you can see that that is part of the shift to the digital age where companies go, maybe we should learn how to do this ourselves. And that was a massive transformation for Transport for London, because with their management and the team that we built, we adopted Agile practices. I explained why we were doing things. Managers were part of the decision, and they said, fine, if there's a good reason and you can justify it, let's do it. Everything was very transparent. Our success was obvious. Each delivery that we did, it was always on time. It was always on budget. Everybody, all the stakeholders were involved. So there was no doubt that it was a success. It was a bit of a no-brainer then for them to say, okay, this is our way of working. But the other thing that you get, and sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, the other thing that happened within that, so they just wanted software because none of their suppliers would build these systems. They thought they were too difficult. And we built them and showed that they could be built and be successful. The thing that emerged from that was TFL managers realized that they now had some intellectual property that was valuable elsewhere, specifically all the countries that had public transport systems whereby they could use contactless cards for payment. So straight away, you've got the emergence of intellectual property, IP, that's valuable, that's licensable, that's reusable. And that was never the intention. That just came out as we went along.
That's really interesting because a lot of companies outsource the crown jewels, I call it. What's so central to what they're doing, and in a cost-cutting drive, cut, let's outsource everything. That's really encouraging that it sounds like one of the first things you did in TFL, but I guess that was a journey for the managers in TFL as well, right?
Totally. We went along together. I was the technical expert that had built commercial enterprise software. So that's why I was hired. And the Agile was an experiment. Scrum was still fairly new back then. We just followed the Scrum prescription, or we followed the Scrum guide prescriptively. Yeah. I was quite into extreme programming, XP. So we did all of the XP things. We would do spikes when we needed to learn something, and we operated user stories, that type of arrangement. And it just worked very, very well.
And you also have a background not just in commercial. I know there are a few examples, including TFL in the book, but you're also doing some academic research at the moment, as far as I understand.
I am, John. I got a bit hooked on this. So, I did an apprenticeship. I flunked out of university. I started at university doing a bachelor's, and it wasn't practical enough for me. I kind of really wanted to get my hands dirty. So I switched to doing an HND at Rolls-Royce at their college. And then it was only in 2017 that I really got into research, and I did a master's.
Mm.
And I did it in, believe it or not, enterprise agility, because I thought that would be a thing. And I researched that, and I spoke. In fact, I went back and spoke to Shashi Verma, who was the director of TFL, because that was my case study. And I went back in to see him and said, tell me how great Agile was and what it did for you and what a fantastic team we built. And I came out of that meeting realizing the importance of leadership and management. Actually, that was transformational for me, and because I really started to appreciate his view as the responsible, accountable leader. So that got me really interested in management, and part of that master's took me into the literature. And to be honest, I was a bit shocked by how much you could gain from the literature. Remember, I didn't have that university background. There's so much of value there. So I became a bit addicted to literature, and I'm now very, very influenced by what we call the literature, peer-reviewed academic literature, which can be practical, it can be practitioner literature. So I do rely on that. Anything that I come up with tends to be backed by the evidence that's available. And when people say, cite your sources, they'll get the sources. I'll share the papers. I think it's a really interesting way to navigate your way through the world. It's complex, the world of management is really complex, and organizations and people are very complex. But if there is some evidence behind what you're offering and what you're suggesting, I think that can be helpful.
That really rings a bell for me, Russ, because I've been doing a lot of commercial research, not academic research, on engagement models, for want of a better expression, for enterprise agility, not just businesses, but maybe government organizations as well. And I noticed almost 70 engagement models.
Yeah.
Maybe 30 of them, they would say, we have a book, we have a community, we have a certification program. It's our way. Our way is the right way. And it must be very confusing for people. So it's really cool that way back when you were involved in that piece of work in TFL, that you kind of kept it back to basics. You had, really good engineering practices and kept it really, really simple. That's actually one of the things I really enjoyed about the book as well, because after researching lots of engagement models, and when I read yours, I realized your one was a new engagement model. But what I liked about it was the language was really crisp. You could have wavered and kind of put lots of conditions in everything that you said, but you chose not to do that, and that made it much easier, much more digestible. And so I'd love to hear why this book. What was it that kind of attracted you to writing this particular book, An Operating Model for Business Agility?
Well, I stayed away from another model, as you said, and I think your work, by the way, in doing all of this research about what's out there in terms of agility, I think it's fantastic. And thank you so much for including mine as well. But I stayed away from it for a long time because the natural reaction is, oh no, not another model, or every consultant's got a model. And, I work a lot with managers, and I've been a manager, and I've been an interim CTO. You don't have time for another intellectual activity of, okay, this is really interesting, but so what? And the so what question drives a lot of this. So if you're going to talk to managers, it has to be actionable. You have to give them something that's practical. And I suppose that's the problem. That's one of the tensions that exists between academia and practice, is an academic will come back with their research findings and set it out in front of them. And it's like this smorgasbord of wonderful facts, all of which can be supported by evidence. Whereas the practitioner is going to go, well, what do I do with this? And it is really a challenge to say, well, here's some information. This is critical thinking. You can now make some decisions for yourself based on all of this information. But I'm a manager. I need to get my figures in. I need to get my budget straight. I need to know who to hire and when. So there is this constant tension. I wanted to make sure that I provided something that was a model, that just something that was in the back of your mind that you could refer to say, this is how an organization really works. And John, you and I have both worked in very large organizations. So this may not be how a tiny organization works, although I think you'll find some commonalities, because the model itself, and it's a chalice. We can say that it's like that, ancient chalice full of some lovely welcoming liquid. I can't help it. I think of mead, honey, alcohol.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong. Yeah. But you can fill it with anything you like.
You come up with a model in the book, which if we were to kind of audio visualize that, it's a chalice. And there's almost a metaphor, not just in the chalice itself, but also in each aspect of the chalice. And you've got the kind of the vessel piece at the top, and
yes,
and that's kind of where you're going to bring us, I guess.
I think I wanted to find a way to encapsulate what I was experiencing inside of large organizations, both having been a software developer on enterprise systems, but also working closely with managers. So I've never been one of those consultants that thinks managers don't know what they're doing and need to hire outsiders. I've always thought managers are the experts of their organization. You have to help them. You have to help them with the way that they're approaching things, where they're seeing things, and enable them to make better decisions. That's all you're doing. So I felt that there was a need for something that recognized some of the invisible parts of the organization. As you well know, that old pyramid thing, the triangle, that it's very good at saying this is what your people look like, although it's a bit out of date, but it's not very good at saying this is how your people work together. This is how they feel. This is why they're not doing what you've asked them to do. It just doesn't have any of those tensions and any of that, the values. I suppose if we talk about Agile, or even if you go back to the Toyota, what became the lean systems, that way of thinking, it's all based in values or purpose. Drucker, Peter Drucker used to talk about what's the purpose. Unfortunately, that ended up as mission statements, which wasn't a great thing. Simon Sinek, start with why. And these are all invisible. They're all intangible. So I wanted something that was a model that said, yes, of course you've got delivery and budget and prioritization and difficult decisions. Of course you've got all of that. But your customers have to come at the top. They have to be first. But you also have to think about what's going on with your people. How do they feel? How do your managers feel about being asked to execute this policy that you've come up with? And we saw that a lot coming out of COVID, coming out of lockdown, where managers were being given policies to enact that said you have to come back into the office 4 days a week or 3 days a week. And some managers didn't like that. They didn't feel that was right. So that creates tension within them. So I just wanted something that had this sense whereby, there is the ordinary operating model, customers, delivery systems, prioritization systems, lots of feedback loops and lots of very mechanical types of controls, which are essential. But there's also stuff that's going on beneath that, which is your management believes in certain things. They have some fundamental values, and those values, based on their knowledge and their beliefs, drive their decisions. And those decisions create the context, create the environment in which everybody's working. So let's explore that, go through that for a second. We're paying for a giant, great big building. It's very expensive to run. There is a belief in an executive that says, we can't waste that money, right? That's waste. We have to do something with it. Let's fill it with our employees. So they will then issue an instruction that says everybody has to come back into the office at least 3 days a week. And it's there because they want to fill this empty building, because otherwise it feels like it's waste. It's a cost. Right? That's fundamental belief, and that's the way that shapes the environment. And you'll know from working with John Said and yourself, John is all about how management decisions shape the working environment. And then you have to feedback. You have to learn from that.
Indeed. One of the tensions, as you put it, I like the language you use on that, by the way, is between I guess, exploiting what you already have.
Yes.
And I was talking to a guy only yesterday in Cork and in Ireland. He was saying to me, well, it's kind of natural to want to optimize factories, for example, that are, almost guaranteed to make profit because there's so much demand for the product that they have. That's much more tempting than making an innovation run slot available in the factory on the off chance that there might be some value in there. And so there's really magnetism towards, well, let's exploit as well as we can, but let's be not taking so many bets. And over time, that magnetism gets so strong that eventually the company kind of loses its way and can't actually innovate anymore, has to actually buy other companies to innovate, in fact, and then squeeze the innovation out of them. And as that chap said to me yesterday, it's kind of, a company has maybe lost its way if it needs to create an innovation department, because innovation should be part of everything that we do. Exactly. And so it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Some companies, they say they'll sell up this island over there, and then that'll be their new fancy-wancy part of finding new products. That can work, but actually that's only kind of response to the organization losing the capability to do it itself, kind of thing. They're real tensions, aren't they? Like effectiveness, efficiency, capability as well, and speed.
Yeah. And what's interesting, so when I did my master's and I looked in the literature for something about organizational agility, I couldn't find it. There was no Agile. Right? Agile is really in the literature. It is just something that came out of IT and software development. And let's face it, that's what the Agile Manifesto was. And it's no doubt it transformed the way we develop software. So Agile, we can say with confidence, better way of developing better software. But the values behind the Agile Manifesto are not the values of managers of organizations. It's really key. And there's a little bit of irony here, which is as great software developers, as great though the Agile Manifesto authors were as software developers, that was never a requirement. It was never a requirement to transform management. So we have, for some reason, we've now got this idea that Agile should be able to transform organizations. Well, no, probably it shouldn't, because that was never a requirement. So I don't even know why we're trying to do it. What I have found in the literature, and I found this as part of my doctoral research, is I think there's a moral equivalent of Agile, and it's called organizational ambidexterity. It's quite a mouthful. And it's exactly those tensions that you're describing, is how do you make sure that you are being efficient? Because actually you have to make profits. You have to keep your revenues going. You have to reduce the costs for the stuff that's got predictable value.
Yeah.
So your predictable value activities, you know what the solution is. It's deterministic. Reduce your costs. That's the only thing you can control. This is Taiichi Ohno's teaching, is the market will set the price. Only thing that you can control, obviously set the quality as well, but the only thing you control is the amount of waste that goes into making it, and that's your cost. So that's really important. And in fact, Ono-san talked about being efficient both in production and in adaptation. So then he said, look, the other side of that, your exploration and innovation, why can't we be efficient in the way that we do that? Dave Snowden's acceptation is really about that. It's a very efficient way of repurposing for innovation. But yeah, an organization, if it's going to survive for the long term, it has to be able to get the value out of the investments that it's made, and it has to be able to reduce its costs in pursuit of efficiency. But that doesn't make either one of them good or bad. It means that you have to do both.
Yeah, you have to do both, and at the same time, if you over-index on any of them, it penalizes the other, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. It does. And you become too extreme. And so there's a really interesting paper. Well, I find it interesting. Leventhal and March, 1993. They describe exactly why organizations develop silos, because the knowledge that you need in one area has to be specialized. So you siloing your knowledge, and also therefore you need certain styles of management that make that possible. It might be different budgets, might be different time planning horizons. So you've got management and you've got knowledge and you've got therefore ways of working that are suit one particular either exploration or exploitation. So you end up with that. And the point that Leventhal and March made was this: it's much easier to become more efficient.
Yeah.
You are going to succeed if you try to decrease your time to market. You're going to find some points to shave off of there. But to come up with the next winning product, you're more likely to fail. You'll probably fail 10 times for every one win that you have. So which would you rather do? Yeah, I produced 10 new ideas and they all failed, but my next one's going to win. That's the reality, but that's not going to get you a promotion. Whereas, look, I launched 10 cost reducing initiatives and every one of them produced a result. So you can see there's a drift. There's a natural tendency within our organizations to drift towards increasing efficiency because it's easier.
And also, let's be honest, there's lots of opportunity inside the building as well, isn't there? I mean, you go to these banks, best bank in the whatever country, best app, best this, best that, beautiful dashboards all over the wall, executives clapping themselves on the back. And then, just listen to calls in the call center and then someone says, your app tells me I don't know how to spell my own name, things, stupid things like that. Yeah. So there is opportunity there for sure.
Can I just congratulate you, because I think your hit delete idea is perfect for that, because that applies to that efficiency space. Yeah. Where we've got all the safeguards and the risk management and the efficient, and there's layers and layers, and it does create itself waste.
Yeah.
And your hit delete just cuts straight through that. It's just remove all of those layers of administration and process. Hit delete.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you. Yeah. It's there's a lot of work going into that, trying to get the executive success through agility guide out first, and then there's going to be some more stuff in that space. But getting back to your book, though, so you have the Chalice, right?
Yes.
So tell us more about the Chalice. So, yes. My understanding, there's a vessel at the top. So I can see, like I'm thinking of the Holy Grail and the kind of maybe it is the Holy Grail actually. You got the vessel at the top, which is containing some liquid, and then you've got the environment and the outside. I guess you got the customers. Hopefully you're trying to bring some customers into the vessel, something like that. And then there's something kind of there's the base of the Chalice, which I think you were talking about belief systems and stuff like that, and then there was a kind of a stem of the Chalice between the base and the vessel, and there was a few little mini metaphors in there as well. Can you tell us a bit more about these, Russ? Fill the vessel for us.
Yeah. Well, you described it very well. Thank you for doing that. And filling the vessel. So let's start with that. Right?
Yeah.
Is the liquid in the vessel?
Yeah.
Are your people? Yeah. So that pyramid, that triangle model that we used to have with layers and stuff.
Yeah.
That's now the liquid in the vessel.
Yeah.
That's your people.
Yeah.
And what the shape, what the physical shape of the vessel is the boundaries of your organizational structure. That's the legal entity.
Yeah.
And it's got to be open at the top because you need customers.
Yeah.
But you also need new staff as well. You need new employees. So we're open to that. So we're open at the top to the market and the context. So all these, the pyramid, for instance, has no sense of the context in which it operates. The Chalice is open at the top. We're trying to attract new customers, but at the same time, we're engaging with other stakeholders. And they could be internal stakeholders. We have silos in our organization. So if I'm product development, I have to engage with marketing. Well, they're another silo. They're effectively their own Chalice.
Yeah.
Their system, or their managers have got their own beliefs.
Yeah.
They think marketing is everything.
Yeah.
Right? So straight away you can start to see that each Chalice could represent an entity. And just by putting those chalices together side by side, you go, look, we're supposed to be in the same company, but we operate very differently, different people. What do we have in common? Well, the thing you have in common is your customers' interests. Just by imagining two chalices or two departments together and going, what's the common purpose here? We want to deliver product to our customers and make them happy. You can now ask questions, just ordinary, lean, agile questions. How are you going to measure that? How do you know your customers are happy? But also it allows you to start seeing that the base of these chalices, the beliefs of the people within are different. And I think it's really important to allow that intangible difference to come in. So I've always been very radically inclusive. I've always come along, everyone's part of this. Let's understand it together. Well, now you're starting to have a metaphor that makes that real. Is we've got two different departments that think, operate, and believe different things. Let's stand them next to each other and let's express that. Let's see what that is, and then work out what we have to believe in to reach up to our customer to satisfy them. If you like, we're bringing into the conversation things that have always been unstated or assumed. So a team has always, it's always been assumed that a team works towards a shared goal, shared purpose, but rarely do they.
We often get lost. Yeah,
we get lost, or teams are given, they're assigned different bits of work, to individual people. And now we're saying, look, here's a metaphor that helps you visualize that and say, what are we all working for here? Or underneath it, and this was the bit you were trying to get to, is where do our beliefs, which are hidden, conflict with what we're actually doing in our business? And that point of conflict, that's the stem, that's the kind of... And if you look at medieval chalices, that was always decorated. It's as if they knew symbolically that this is the point of power. And it is, because it's the point at which all the upward and downward forces come together. They meet. And that's where I think the tensions in the organization exist, where all of our initiatives meet what we're saying, internal initiatives meet with what the CEO has promised to the shareholders. Well, they meet there. What are you going to do with that power, with those tensions, unless you acknowledge them and discuss them and resolve them?
Is it fair to say that your book is introducing this model of the chalice for later elaboration in the series for the different aspects of the chalice?
Yes. I'm just giving you the metaphor. I'm describing the metaphor. That's what keeps the book so thin, right? And in fact, we're doing some very interesting work with live transformation, just bringing managers together, presenting the chalice and saying, what stands out for you? Now, whenever I've done this before, and in fact, the first CIO that ever saw it, who was the person that said it's a holy chalice, he and his team went straight to that stem and said, oh, I think that's about culture. I think that's all about... I never use the word culture. I never mention culture, right? It exists, but you can't do much with it. But for them, it was all about culture. And that's where they wanted to go with that. So you can then take that, draw the chalice, present the chalice very simply to people, or they can, and use it as an engagement model to engage with people and say, what's our culture like? How do we shift that? How do we measure it? What do we want it to be?
Just on culture, I just throw a curveball at you, but don't mean to throw a curveball at you, but I'm just genuinely curious. Some people say that culture is the combined set of assumptions, written or unwritten. That's kind of one way of putting it together, the way we act together, if you like, the way we do things around here. And some people would say, well, this is true what we believe, because that drives those assumptions. And some people would say, well, you can believe all you want, but actually you go into a company and it's just not set up the right way. You're just going to be pickled within a few months. And so it's all about structure. And just kind of curious where you are with all this. Like, do you have any view on would you just see culture as something that you can change and you just have to accept it what it is, or what's your attitude to it, I guess?
The one I really like, the saying I really like, is you can't change culture, you change it every day. Right. And of course, Ed Shine was the expert on culture. It is all of those things, isn't it? So the person that stands up and says, look, our culture here is toxic. We've got a boss who's a bully. And people are leaving because they're unhappy. Right. The culture then what happens next depends on the culture. If that voice is suppressed, if that person is exited, right, that comes from the beliefs of essentially the people in charge. If, on the other hand, the culture says, crikey, hadn't really thought about it like that before, what do we do to improve? Let's get together. Let's be inclusive and get some diverse opinions, right? Then you've got a different culture. For me, I think two things have happened quite recently. And this Chalice model emerged 5, 6, 7 years ago. It's been a long time in the making. Since then, two things have happened. First of all, diversity, equality, and inclusivity have risen up the corporate agenda. Great. Probably eclipsed corporate social responsibility, but we have, social justice and we have environmental concerns. Those are now big. But the other thing that's happening is AI. All of a sudden, managers are having to say, managers who are now, by the way, understanding what agile and agility means, that's taken 20 years, but now all of a sudden, we've got artificial intelligence coming in, whereby as a manager, you're not so much managing budgets and resources, you are now managing knowledge workers who themselves are managing artificial intelligence assistants. So every knowledge worker will start to be able to use AI assistants in their work. So what does that do to the role of the manager? It shifts yet again. Right? And what I love about working with managers is they adapt. That's exactly what they do.
Indeed, AI is presenting a huge business case for people wanting to be more adaptive. But I'm curious as well, even with AI, just like with agility, will people just implement AI in marketing, AI in supply chain, and not knit the thing together like they should, you know what I mean, and really take advantage? And I guess the cultures of organizations will drive how they respond, really, won't they? Do they take it seriously? Are they only looking at their incumbent competitors? Are they really thinking about who the new potential competitors might be? It's a very challenging time for people. But in a worrying way as well, what I'm also noticing is that agility isn't at the top table and might be less at the top table now because AI is such a thing, even though actually agility is something that might help to deliver that, if that makes sense. One of the things, at least. It's very, very, very challenging. And with this chalice that you've got, right? So where do people start with this? You have a book series. There's going to be more books coming, right? But let's say people read your book and they've got the chalice now. They've kind of conceptualized it in their head and so on. Where did they go from there, Russ?
Well, I can tell you what they are doing, because I'm getting feedback from reviewers who are managers, of course, and they're saying, this has really made me think. Well, that's all I would ever expect. That's as much as I could ask. This has made me think, we've made some changes lately in our organization, and this is making me question about the way we did that. So that's making them think. I've got somebody else who received an email this morning from somebody that says, I've got my own model. Well, great. So now he's thinking about how this model compares with his existing model. So again, making them think. If it leads to conversations, if it leads to organizations being healthier and happier, then I'm happy. Then I've done my job.
Thank you, Russ. You mentioned while we were talking about doctoral research, and I don't know the difference between doctoral and postdoctoral. Can you help me with that?
It is tricky. So they're both, you get to put doctor in front of your name for both, if that's your bag. I learned this from my director of studies just last week. She said something that really made it crystal clear. And I'm lucky I've got a fantastic, Kate McGuire, a fantastic director of studies. So she's so worldly, and I always come away inspired. She explained like this. She said, we were talking about methodology, in fact. She said, in a PhD, in a theoretical PhD, you're trying to advance the theory that exists. In order to do that, you have to select a methodology from the list of accepted methodologies. It's a prescription, and you then must follow that, and you will be assessed on your ability to follow it. And if you followed it really well and your findings are really interesting, there's a chance that they'll be accepted and go, oh yeah, in theory, that's true, right? You now have a new theory. That's it. I think Einstein did that actually with his general theory of relativity, or his specific theory came out first, didn't it? I think that's exactly what he did. Whereas with a doctorate, it's a professional doctorate and a practitioner doctorate, which is what I'm doing. You go in with what you've already learnt through your professional practice. You go in essentially with knowledge, and that counts. So you then say, so in my case, I think the role of the manager is emerging. I think it's changing, and I want to investigate the ways in which it's emerging and what managers are doing. I don't really have, there's no methodology for that. But there's nothing that I can take off the shelf and say, that's the way to investigate that. So with a doctorate, what happens is your methodology emerges. And when you come to write it up, what you're going to say is, I started by talking to managers. I did this. Oh, and then AI came along and disrupted everything. So suddenly the digital age wasn't about Agile anymore. It was about AI. So I included that in my conversations. That's exactly what's happening to me. Generative AI is such a big thing now that it's on management's radar. You have to do something about it. So whereas that used to be agile transformation, it's now, okay, well, we've got transformation, but we've also got AI. So in short, PhD, theoretical contribution is what you're trying to make. You're trying to make contribution to theory, and you have to follow a prescriptive methodology. A doctorate, you bring in your own knowledge basis and your methods, you pick and choose, but then what you're going to come out with emerges. You don't necessarily make a contribution to theory, you will make a contribution to practice. You might have case studies, interviews, observations.
And that's kind of what agility is all about, isn't it?
It's an experience, isn't it? You do it, and there's no two places who do agility the same.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So it does fit. Yeah. Thank you for bringing us back to that. It does fit perfectly. Yes. And I would encourage everybody that's interested in learning. A doctorate is it's a wonderful experience. Really, really highly recommended.
And so, not only publishing this book on the 9th of May on Amazon, but the academic research that you're doing, I presume in a couple of years you'll be publishing something around that as well.
Less than that. Less than that. What are we in? 2023?
Yeah.
Early next year, provided I can find an academic publisher.
Yeah.
So this book is beautifully thin because originally my original publishing contract was with Bookboon, who do libraries for managers, essentially. And they said, we'll keep it to 10,000 words. And I said, but I've got 50,000 already. So what's in this book is the best 10,000, well, it's 12,000, the best 12,000 words from that 50,000. But what's left, the whole thing, is actually that will be the academic book. That'll be the full strength, everything with all the papers and the references.
Very good. So this is actually giving us a kind of an inside track into where you're going with the research, I guess. Thank you, Russ. One final question for you. One thing that's been emerging for me is I've been seeing case studies of agility all around the world, and some people are making great progress. Some people are making case studies that turn out to be false. Marketing, this kind of not really well tested and so on. You get others that are really well tested. But then what I hear later on is the change actually unraveled.
Yes.
So even the genuine ones are unraveling, and so it kind of makes it really difficult for people to deal with that. And I'm just wondering, is this something that you've noticed as well? That I don't know, maybe there was some company you worked for before. Let's not name any names here, and they make great progress. But then a few years later, you're looking back and you're actually seeing, well, yeah, they kind of went to kind of the old-fashioned way again. They just tried to put a different tint on the more things change, the more they stay the same as the story. What have you been noticing?
Yeah, very much so. So first of all, there isn't enough proper literature, researched case studies about agile transformation. There just isn't. John Smart made a very good point in his thesis. And he said, there aren't enough case studies here that we can even cite anything in the literature. So it doesn't exist. And there's so much stuff that's put forward by companies wanting to blow their own trumpets.
Yeah.
Heads of transformation whose bonuses depend on metrics. And consultancy firms who are trying to push whatever method or certification that they're doing. So that's unreliable. You can offset that with the digital transformation space, which has got much better evidence, is much better researched. So there is some literature in there. But I go back to what Steve Denning used to say a few years ago, is he said, we're very good at creating islands of agility. The challenge is connecting those islands together. So when it comes to Agile, I still think people regard it as an IT thing. So we're gradually seeing IT and tech being more agile, but the rest of the organization isn't. Agile HR is kind of a different flavor. Finance is nowhere at all on this. I saw there was a post on LinkedIn yesterday with phenomenal engagement, like 40,000 likes, and people asking for this huge, great big poster with thousands of different ways of knowing your KPIs and your financial things. And I asked the simple question, where's the customer in all of this? There's nothing here that the customer cares about. So finance is still very much cost accounting and cost motivated about cost. None of that's agile. There's nothing. Where's the throughput accounting? You know, where's the, look, you're in business, you've got, it costs you whatever it costs and you get this revenue coming in. Those are the only financial considerations that you should be concerned yourself with. That was Ellie Goldratt theory of constraints. You know, you've got to look at these organizations in whole. It all comes back to complexity. An organization is complex. Any form of breaking it down into simple parts is a reductionist approach that is going to fail. You have to treat it as a whole and say, it is what it is. I like the idea of it's an ecosystem. I really like that. You know, it is just an ecosystem. That's what it is. So treat it as such and let it be that.
Russ, thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing your book coming out. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you.